Hello friends, Jennifer Pearson here, Thistle Gypsy, with a review of Tarot and Psychology. And this is by Arthur Rosengarten, PhD. And I found out about this book. I learned about this book. I'm pretty sure it was through Kellyanne Maddox. And I don't know how long ago. It was quite some time ago. She did a video about her favorite tarot books, I think, or tarot resources, and she mentioned this, and it definitely, just the title intrigued me. And so I finally got it, and I finally read it, worked my way through it, and I would really, I guess I would say, that I would strongly recommend it to people who are, I would say, primarily reading for others. If you're just reading for yourself, I don't know about this, but that it would be that useful to you. Maybe it would. One of the things that I think is that makes it useful to almost anybody who reads tarot and finds themselves needing to explain it or in some regard, quote unquote, justify it. And that is that it does take a look at science and philosophy and how there are aspects of contemporary science and philosophy that support the notion of finding meaning in supposedly random events. So that is one aspect that will probably result in my reading it again at some point and maybe taking notes on it as I read it. We might be having an animal incident in the background here that I'll have to break up. The new kid on the block is feeling very feisty this morning, and he's encountering my cat that becomes a blowtorch whenever she sees him. She just hisses at him and moans and groans at him. I think he just popped out of a hiding place at her, and she's extremely displeased. So the purpose of this book, and I don't know that I'm representing it perfectly, but is to introduce the idea that, and this is from the 1990s, to introduce 2000, this is copyright 2000, introduce the notion to the clinical counseling community that tarot could be a tool in aiding people in acknowledging maybe and reflecting on their experiences. And so he gives, in the beginning, he gives some examples in which he has used it in his practice. He shares the card spread that he uses. He uses sort of a modified, although not too modified, but kind of a psychologically modified version of the Celtic Cross, which is here. And so he talks about that and how he uses it. And then he talks about kind of the position of psychotherapy at this point and how it essentially is at a point where, or was when this was written, this is getting on 20 years ago now, is at a point where it should be, in his thinking, it should be receptive to the introduction of tarot as a tool for use in clinical psychology. Let me see, where's the table of contents? So it has the tarot of psychology, and then the psychology of tarot. And I think it's the psychology of tarot that was, in some ways, the most interesting, but is also the most abstract. So in the tarot of psychology, he's kind of introducing his position, and healing context 3 vignettes, he's showing how he has used tarot. And then the psychology of tarot, he's looking at how tarot fits with like Jungian psychology, to some extent philosophy and even physics. In the next part, empirical studies, he talks about synchronicity, and that's Jung's theories of synchronicity. I don't know if he goes into physics here too, but he's bringing in a lot of science that supports the notion that people can find useful meaning in randomly selected cards. So, that's just, I don't know, it was really interesting. And he had actually done, where is it here? He did a PhD dissertation. So this book has an index. This book also has a bibliography in the back, which is a wonderful bibliography, because it has, everything from tarot resources like familiar names like Rachel Pollack, to philosophers, to psychologists, obviously. Probably there are some physicists in here. There's something called ethnographic portraits. Anyway, so he's drawing on a lot of the social sciences and some of the hard sciences as well. But it's here in 1985, it has him as having done a doctoral dissertation. All right, so anybody who's going to school and is into tarot, take note. This is his doctoral dissertation, and it's called Accessing the Unconscious, a Comparative Study of Dreams, the TAT, which I have no idea what that is, and tarot. So he actually worked tarot into a doctoral dissertation. So there you go. So he did, and that was in 1985. In 1994, he also wrote something that he self-published, which is Tarot as a Psychotherapeutic Tool. So I think this opens up a lot of possibilities for those of us who have an academic bent, an interest in being academic or education, and the study of the tarot. And I had thought of doing, maybe going, I have my bachelor's in English, and perhaps doing a master's that would focus on more the folktale aspect within tarot, or folk studies. But anyway, so there you go. The psychology of tarot. So there are those sections. And I just think, it's habitual causality, in which, this is a section within a section, in which he kind of accuses people in the field of psychology as being too, I don't know if you'd call it prejudiced toward causality. And in this book, he's not in any way encouraging people to scrap practices that they feel are working for them, things that are more causality, quote-unquote, science-based, but he's saying that the nature of the field should also invite the use of the tarot as a tool. Now, in the final section, well, is it the final section? The final section of note, yes, empirical studies. He actually creates a research project, and it was interesting. It's I would call it a light research project. And he even says that, it's not completely thorough. It's just intended to show how the tarot could possibly shed light on situations that might be befuddling the mental health field overall. And he looks particularly at domestic violence, both the perpetrators and the victims. So, again, if you wanted to go forward and do some kind of research using tarot or something, this is a good example of how somebody has gone about it. And then he has some appendices. So the first appendix, he goes through and gives the cards, each of the cards. And I think he has both, Appendix A is both majors and minors, or does he no, he puts the major arcana in a separate, no, they're all in Appendix A. Excuse me. Definitely fighting allergies. So yeah, he kind of, though he doesn't look for his meanings, his tarot meanings widely. He quotes Rachel Pollack a lot. I'm not sure who else, so there's just a few people that he really relies on. What is her name? Angelus Arian? She did a book, but it's based more on Thoth, which he never acknowledges, than the Rider-Waite Smith. But he also refers to some of her comments about cards and the tarot in general. In any case, he goes through all of the cards, giving a phrases that indicate the meaning of the cards, the image of the card, traditional kind of meaning, and then what he calls a spectrum of possibility, from positive to negative, essentially. And so seeing the good and the bad in each card. And Appendix B is him using his study that he did to give people, I think it's just to give people a look at how a person would express the card, like the Hermit reversed. I am an isolated, lonely man. I struggle to be self-reliant and true to my convictions. Okay, so he puts them in the I voice. And I think, again, this is not something that's going to be earth-shattering to those of us who use tarot regularly. But I think this is to demonstrate the self-perception, how the cards translate to a self-perception. And it's in here for people who are unfamiliar with tarot. And then there's the bibliography. And the index. So I found it a very interesting read. It can be quite technical. Okay, quite technical. He's approaching it, again, trying to convince people in the science the science community to accept tarot as a useful tool. Along the way, he disses, I don't know. He talks about how problematic it is that the tarot has been such a close friend to the occult community, let's put it that way. That association of the tarot with the quote-unquote woo-woo community tends to prejudice those who are of a more scientific bent against considering it a useful tool. And so he, at one point, I don't know if he says the gypsy trappings or something. He almost wants to take tarot away from, and this is the problem with a lot of science and stuff. When you try to legitimate something, is that you want to take it away from the everyday people who are using it in their own way, And so there is a little bit of that here, but not a lot. And of course, nobody could ever succeed in that, right? The tarot is its own thing, and it is very useful. And so one thing that he doesn't mention is that it does make your own reflection and psychological exploration something that you can do without the psychologist to some extent. Now, I'm not going to disrespect psychologists at all, because even though he says in here that one of the problems in current clinical practice is that no method is shown to be any better than any other method. So it's kind of it's an interesting thing to point out. But certainly I know many people who have benefited from going to psychologists. So I would never discourage anyone from doing that. And even if the primary thing that happens at the psychologist is you see somebody with a degree on the wall telling you what you already knew to be true, that still has value. Just like when the tarot tells us something that we already knew to be, it confirms for us, it validates it. That in itself can be life-changing. So yes, I would never discourage anyone from going to see a psychologist. And I would never discourage anybody from getting their own deck of tarot cards. So there you go. Everything, more possibilities, more opportunities is better when it comes to mental health, reflection, discovery, personal discovery, etc. More options, the better. No need to limit. And I think that's part of what he's arguing here, is why not, when we have other tools even that are similar, and he talks about something called sand play that uses symbols in this way, then why not use this tool that has been refined over time? All right, so that's it, Tarot and Psychology. I can easily recommend it for those of you who don't mind some of the technical aspects and the fact, which, I can see this annoying some people, and the fact that it is essentially Rosengarten is doing his best to make a scientific argument for the use of the tarot in a specific clinical sense, okay? Which is, most of us who do tarot readings are not going to use it in the way that he is talking about. But it's still very interesting to read to read how he talks about it, how he makes that argument. All right, there you go. Another book that is worth your time should you care to read it. Take care. Bye-bye.